Okay, so remember that they are changing my voice. This video is about key parts in Romans 7. I think I failed to finish typing up the rest of the chapter, but it's a fairly short chapter for what I gather. And so I'm going to go ahead and read the whole chapter. Now, it can be a bit confusing at times. I need you to understand that a key part of this is the sword of the Spirit striking down the spirit of sin. God in me, you accepting that I'm the top martial artist and your true teacher, and God and I in you, if you come into the divine order and accept my commands, the commands that come from God, then you would be in me and I would be in you. You would be in me and I'm in the Father, in that way, in that path. That is the way. I am the way to be in the Father, God in heaven. And I would be inside of you, striking down the spirit of sin. The words that I teach you that come from God, the commands that come from God that I've learned from God. I've learned from studying humanity, reading the Bible, looking at things and learning who I am, and I truly understood what they were getting at, what they were saying, and God himself has revealed it to me as the top martial artist ever. And a very central command is not to cheat me out of my right to lead. And that command I've received from God, from nature, from just universal justice, universal pinpointed moral precision, focus, moral intensity. I know a lot of you are in the military and in other groups, and you think that you're supposed to stop me or that's your job, but you know that I'm right to insist on this. Okay. So released from the law, bound to Christ. Bound to who? Christ. Right? The word hits is in the word Christ. See, our hits. Bethlehem built he Ham. Marshall is marital scrambled, and I Christ in the bridegroom. Do you not know, brothers and sisters, for I am speaking to those who know the law, that the law has authority over someone only as long as that person lives? For example, by law, a married woman is bound to her husband as long as he is alive. But if her husband dies, she is released from the law that binds her. So then, if she has sexual relations with another man while her husband is still alive, she is called an adulteress. But if her husband dies, she is released from the law and is not an adulteress if she marries another man. So my brothers and sisters, you also died to the law through the body of Christ, right? The collection of believers in the divine order, that you might belong to another, to him who was raised from the dead, in order that we might bear fruit for God. So why are you supposed to be bound to me? So that you might bear fruit for God. It's also in John 15, right? The true vine. Raised from the dead, that's a bit more of a complex idea. You first have to break down what they're actually getting at. That resurrection, we'll save it for another video. But the resurrection, in a sense, is figurative. And it has to do with a lot of things. There's a lot of ways to interpret it. It's like saying, love your family. How? Right? You love them by providing for them, by giving your kid a hug in a certain way, what have you, by being in the divine order. It covers a lot of things when we're talking about the idea of the resurrection from the dead. And just like with loving your family, a lot of them I don't think of off the top of my head, because it touches on a lot of things at once that are sacred life ideas, martial art ideas, sacred hidden ideas in the Bible. The Lord is a warrior. The Lord is his name. For when we were in the realm of the flesh, the sinful passions aroused by the law were at work in us, so that we bore fruit for death. So what is it saying? When somebody is, look at it in terms of martial arts, it's easy to understand. You'll understand this. You should write down two phrases, white belt and black belt. When somebody first enters martial arts, they don't know what they're doing, right? When you first try to understand how to be righteous and right with God, you don't know what you're doing. So there's rules. Those rules become, you might say, second nature as you progress through the system that is superimposed on a martial arts system that's for all of humanity, is the system that you see in the Bible. Okay? That when you first were told, hey, do this, and this. You're like, man, that's hard. In the case of the law, it says don't covet your neighbor's things. Now, some of you, you've already coveted before that point. Some of you, you kind of have, and you started thinking about what it means more, and you started to really feel a passion for coveting. As you resisted it, started pushing back. I think the easiest way to understand this is in terms of lust. When you hear someone like me or your preacher or anyone talk about lust, to some degree you're thinking about what that means. Say there's a hot chick in the store or something, you're like, wow. Okay? If you're telling yourself, don't lust, no, I'm not going to look at her. Part of you is saying, you're kidding yourself. You're just suppressing something that you know you're not above. You know that you are not above lusting for that woman, so quit playing. That's what it's telling you. And so when the law says don't do these things or there's going to be serious consequences, there's like a demon building up in you. Imagine if you'd be stoned to death for it. There's a demon building up in you. So the sinful passions were aroused in spirit, right? Sinful passions were aroused by the law. It was the spirit of sin is working the angles on you. And it's not playing with you at all. The Lord is a warrior. He's not someone who, he's not the God of the dead, but the God of the living, who are alive in a warrior spirit, who are disciplined, who are fighting the good fight of faith and the good fight of obedience to God, which is a key component in true faith. And so you're bearing fruit for death right now by cheating me out of my right to lead. Why? Because you're not bound to Christ. You're not a servant of God through me. You are a servant of maybe your church or your family or a corporation or yourself or whatever. So you are bearing fruit for death. The wages of sin is death. The tree of sin produces the fruit of death. But now by dying to what once bound us, we have been released from the law, so that we serve in the new way of the Spirit and not in the old way of the written code. Going back to what I said of God and I, excuse me. I'm in God and you're supposed to be in me. And through me, you can be in God. So you and me and God and me and me and you. You see what I'm saying? That connection, that spiritual grouping. The head, me, the body, you as a member of the body, and God is God, the Father, the core, the one truly in charge. Me at God's right hand. So it says, serve in the way of the Spirit, the flow. Okay, so when that sin that you've aroused by the idea, the message of the law that you're trying to obey, but you're just a white belt. You don't know how to obey it. You don't know how to move masterfully and strike down the spirit. It is my spirit in you that strikes down the spirit of sin in you. So whenever you do feel the urge to sin, you say, wait a second. The top martial artist ever possible is in me. And his argument is universal, pinpointed moral precision. So if I cast out the spirit of sin effectively, and you're doing what is right, and you're actually defeating it, and you're not in a trance-like theater art propaganda state like people who go to church, then truly I am the Son of God. And I know I'm the Son of God. But if you start picturing Serapis, Zagreus, or whoever the false image of Christ you people are using these days is, you're picturing the sinful flesh, the image of sinful flesh. And you're not picturing, you're not living, you're not breathing, you're not conveying the Spirit of God in the top martial artist, who's God's right hand, who strikes down strikes down sin. The word spirit is the play on words for spear, it. The word spear is also rapes, scrambled. For those of you who would take me out of context, that he strikes down spear. He's talking about the spirit. No. I'm talking about the spirit of rebellion, which by default is yoked to the spirit of rape inside of you. That's why you're upholding the cultures you're upholding that are cheating me out of my right to lead, which cause people to have sex in a way they would not otherwise have sex in. And it's the continuity of the rebel spirits of rape, be it pirates or colonists or gangs or corporations or whatever. People's families abusing each other. Stepfathers, whatever. You're in the spirit of rebellion, and that is all the sins. You're in a compartment in the spirit of sin, the spirit of rebellion against God's divine order. And I'm God's right hand. What shall we say then? Okay, so moving on, it's the next section says, the law and sin. What shall we say? Then is the law sinful? Certainly not. Nevertheless, I would not have known what sin was had it not been for the law. For I would not have known what coveting really was if the law had not said, you shall not covet, seizing the opportunity afforded by the commandment produced in me every kind of coveting. So it seized the opportunity which was allowed by the commandment, which produced in him every kind of coveting. For apart from the law, sin was dead. So this is where it gets a little tricky. It's not that sin was dead. Okay? He was sinning by not being in the divine order. If you take this chapter at face value, you take Paul at face value, if you believe he was in the divine order, then what he's describing is that sin really didn't find a house in him. Sin was there in him, but it didn't really take hold. Right? He wasn't really generating in him. It's like somebody who's trying to be nice and decent, who's not in the Spirit of God. Okay? The Spirit of God didn't really come into him and take root, right? The parable of the sower. It didn't find good soil. Sin didn't find good soil until he started thinking effectively in terms of right and wrong and what God requires. And then without the Spirit of God to bring it forth, he started subconsciously and otherwise realizing that sin was actually living in him and causing him to sin. When before, he was still not going to heaven. I am the way, the truth, and the life. He was in a sinful state, but he wasn't an effective, advanced soldier of sin, getting a black belt and being a demon instead of being a soldier of God. Is the way of the law. It's the way of the churches and the mosques and the synagogues. It's the way of everyone else. Once the gospel is preached to the world, either you'll come through me the gate and rally to me and leave, or you'll be lost in hell as the world transforms into a place that's aware of what it means to sin to a certain point as it generates that. And even if they stop teaching right and wrong, it will be the building of that, the foolish builders building of a tower of Babel and confusion and sin. Now, I'm not trying to confuse you at all. If you have any questions, put in the comments. God commands you to put in the comments. I've said this in a very clear way. The rebels are building evil in this world. See Isaiah 57, the righteous are taken away to be spared from evil. The world is being transformed more and more into evil. And for you to know that heaven won't come to this planet, there'll be a new planet, new heaven and new earth. All you need to know is that God can do better than this planet. Those who worship Gaia, Gaia, the Romans, the Greeks, so to speak, their culture, the individuals should rally and obey God through me. They think that earth is magically going to be, it's not going to be heaven. It's not going to be the place where you live with Christ. God can do better. Even the sun is better than the earth. The heavens declare the glory of God far more than the earth. So why would the Son of God live with you here on this planet where the righteous were killed? Okay. Once I was alive apart from the law, but when the commandment came, sin sprang to life and I died. I found that the very commandment that was intended to bring life actually brought death. For sin, seizing the opportunity afforded by the commandment, deceived me, and through the commandment put me to death. So then the law is holy, and the commandment is holy, righteous, and good. Did that which is good then become death to me? By no means. Because in order that sin might be recognized as sin, it used what is good to bring about my death. So in order that sin might be recognized as sin, it used what is good to bring about my death, so that through the commandment, sin might become utterly sinful. Now, this is one way to interpret the Bible here in terms of the resurrection. I was talking about that in either this video or the one before, where I was talking about the difference between Egypt and Rome, where Christ came into the world, right? Christ is a character in the story. He learned the law, and the law put him to death. Then he was resurrected, realizing who he really is. And when he realized who he really is, that's when the Jews and the Romans realized who he is. So in that sense, the resurrection is figurative, right? Just like Paul is describing here, where the law brought to his attention sin. And just like in the story, all these sinful Jews and Romans come and give him a hard time. They're slapping him, throwing rocks at him, trying to push him off a cliff, what have you. Crown of thorns, cape. And he is figuratively and symbolically crucified. The awareness of right and wrong, seeing the demons for what they are, put him to death. And then he rose again in power and glory. We know that the law is spiritual, but I am unspiritual. Paul's saying it, not me. Sold as a slave to sin. I do not understand what I do, for what I want to do, I do not do, but what I hate, I do. And if I do what I do not want to do, I agree that the law is good. As it is no longer I myself who do it, but it is sin living in me. Okay, let's stop here. What he's saying is that he knows right and wrong, and he wants to do what's right. But because he keeps doing what is wrong, he realizes that the law is good and that he doesn't have the power himself to overcome it. He needs a champion. Psalm 19, the sun, the symbol of the bridegroom, the champion. A champion of God, the right hand of God. The mighty warrior who saves from the spirit of sin. For I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. For I do not do the good I want to do, but the evil I do not want to do, this I keep on doing. Now if I do what I do not want to do, it is no longer I who do it, but it is sin living in me that does it. So I find this law at work. Although I want to do good, evil is right there with me. For in my inner being I delight in God's law. But I see another law at work in me, waging war against the law of my mind and making me a prisoner of the law of sin at work within me. What a wretched man I am! Who will rescue me from this body that is subject to death? Thanks be to God who delivers me through Jesus Christ our Lord. So God, through me, I'm the right hand of God, conveying the Spirit of God, the heart of God, the spiritual warrior martial force of God. So then I myself, in my mind, am a slave to God's law, but in my sinful nature, or in the flesh, and that's where my note ends, right? So I'm going to go ahead and try to finish this right here, and then I'm going to look it up and see if I was right about how he's saying it finishes. So he says, so then I myself, in my mind, am a slave to God's law, but in my sinful nature, okay, he's saying he's a slave to sin. In his sinful nature. So that's what he's saying. If you follow that train of thought to its finish, right? Okay. So if you think there's any discrepancy between what he's saying and what I'm saying, please put in the comments. I'll help you see why I'm right. Now keep in mind that the Bible, to some degree, it isn't open to interpretation, but it is in terms of if the interpretation is correct. For example, when it says loving your neighbor is keeping God's commandment. You say, well, what it's saying is loving my neighbor with all my heart. And he said, no, that's not what it says. But it is what it's saying, because that is fair and just and good to interpret it that way. If you say, okay, insisting that your neighbor does what is right in a way that is strategic, logical, fair, and just and right. You say, well, that's not what it's saying. It is what it's saying, because that's fair and just and logical and good and righteous and just and right. You see what I'm saying? I know I said just twice, but you get what I'm saying. So now I'm going to stop it here. I'm going to go to the website, and I'm going to look up Romans 7, see how it ends, and make sure it ends the way that I anticipated that it would end.